Greetings. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Gil Crosby, and I am going to cover the plan change methods of Kurt Lewin, the founder of my profession, organization development. There's Mr. Lewin on the cover of my latest book, Plan Change. Why Kurt Lewin's social science is still best practice. It was best practice when he created it. It's still best practice for business results change, which we usually call change management these days, which usually is like a public relations campaign. That's not the same thing as the plan change that Mr. Lewin devised and proved with research was practical, reliable, sustainable. You can apply it and implement change in organizations and in entire nations, culture change for entire nations with these methods. So that's why human progress is on the frontier, because there is culture change that needs to occur in most nations. So here we go, the science and art of plan change. The agenda for this brief presentation, 30 to 40 minutes. The Lewin leadership model that consistently results in high performance and morale. Coming right up. Field theory. So Lewin thought systemically. He applied the physical sciences to understanding human behavior. He created a social science. He was the first social scientist. His social science was to explain all phenomenon from individual to group to organization to global. And that was his goal, and I think he succeeded. And the motivational power of group decision. So when peers come together to commit and have the opportunity to influence together, to think, to kick things around, they are unstoppable in implementing. And that will all result in how you can do your own plan change. I have been applying Kurt Lewin's methods since 1984. I didn't realize at the time nearly as much about it as I know now, of course. But I did know it was related to Lewin. And I got that from my father. Here he is, 92-year-old Robert P. Crosby, who I'm blessed to say is still with us and still sound of mind. Not quite as frisky as he used to be, but I was with him on a virtual call yesterday. And so he's doing quite well. And this is my brother Chris, who also followed Dad's footsteps in this work of doing Lewinian OD. Just briefly, because it matters, the conditions Lewin was born into. He was a Jewish male in Germany before the rise of Nazism, and he was there throughout the rise of Nazism. So he always had a part of his mission of social science was to understand what's it like for oppressed groups, and what does that do for individual behavior? The environment you're in, how does it influence your experience and your beliefs and your emotions? And so he was always very much on the side of any oppressed groups, and also got it that you need to have conditions of equality because the oppressors are also messed up by being oppressors. The conditions of oppression are bad for everybody. It may make some people wealthy and they may have power, but they also are going to be miserable in many ways, suspicious, paranoid, ashamed of themselves if they really stop and think about what's happening. It's not good for human beings to have oppression. So Lewin was born in Mogilno. We need Mogil. And in Posen province, which at the time was part of Prussia. And so it went on to become, of course, annexed by Germany And eventually, now it's part of Poland. So the Polish people there are quite proud of Mr. Lewin. Action research. So this is one of the things Lewin is known for, and you know this stuff. It's been an influence throughout all the quality stuff, safety stuff, any process improvement. Lewin was an influence on. There were others tinkering at the time also, and so you can't just say one was the complete source. But he was one of the first to take science and say, look, we can understand society and groups and individuals using science. We can have research where we hypothesize about what will happen if we do something. We can plan, we can do the action, and then we can do fact finding, which by that he meant we can assess the results and then come up with the next plan and continuously improve. So that's Lewin influencing you and society. What Lewin also believed that gets lost in that message by many is that the people who are involved in the situation are the right people to do the diagnosis. So the workers in any job are the right people to do their own assessment of what's preventing the work from going as smooth as possible. What's preventing their morale from being as high as possible? You are the right person to do your own evaluation using these tools of what's in the way of your own engagement, your own effectiveness. And so there were social science laws that he identified, but as it says in the yellow below here, the diagnosis has to be done locally. That means by whoever's facing the challenges. It can't be imposed even by well-meaning people. The imposition of solutions will lead to resistance in the system. And the social science laws don't give the strategy for change. The people have to come up with it. As you can tell, that's fairly democratic in its essence. And Lewin was a devout Democrat in the sense of wanting structures that create equality and also, though, allowed leaders to lead. So he believed in democracy with leadership. He was quite happy that the United States and Great Britain were effective democracies in fighting Nazism, for instance, and Japan at the time. So this is not a model of everyone's equal, now we all vote on everything. This is a model of you influence and you help influence, if it's political, who's in office, and then they need to act. They need to lead. You need to follow. You need to allow them to lead. So are you a good follower? If you're not a good follower, then you're not an effective member of a democracy. If all you can do is tear down the people that are elected, it's not going to help. So it's easy to do, it might be fun, but it doesn't help. And same in organizations. Leaders must lead. You must lead. So, but he also did some research. This man did wonderful research, Kurt Lewin, around plan change. And so one of the things that he did was he had groups of boys in after-school programs, and some girls were involved in these research efforts for years, at least 3 years. At the University of Iowa, he led these research studies where there was 3 groups, and the groups were making papier-mâché masks. And this was after school, and so the kids didn't know they were in research. The adults, that their parents and so on, had agreed to it, but the kids didn't know. So they're in there making their papier-mâché masks, getting ready, and there's a leader, an adult leader in each group. And the adult leader is leading intentionally from a different leadership style. And so these were the 3 styles. At first there was 2, authoritarian and democratic, and Lewin realized that the people he stuck in to do the democratic leadership were just doing nothing. They were being too passive. So that's when he identified the 3rd style down here, laissez-faire, he called it. I call it too passive. And so they thought they were doing the right thing, but democracy is not passive, and neither can group leadership be. Here's what he discovered. The groups of kids that were with an authoritarian leader, for one, if the same group here, the leaders would switch, and then there'd be a democratic leader with that same group, and the kids would adapt to the leader. And then there would be a passive leader with the same group, and the kids would adapt. Every group of kids over the years of these studies would adapt to the leader, and there would be predictable behaviors. If the authoritarian leader was in charge, then they would be too controlling. They would make all the decisions. They would not listen to input. They were not interested in input. They would tell the kids what to do. And so the kids would obey, and because everyone knows how to obey, and so they would obey, and they would work, and they would get things done for a while. But part of the study was that the leaders would step out of the room. And when the leader stepped out of the room, all of a sudden they just get up and walk out in each of the groups. When the leader got up, walked out of the authoritarian group, the kids started fighting with each other. This was predictable. They were tense. They had been bickered at by the leader, basically. So then they would snap at each other, and so much so that a couple kids just quit, went home crying, which is kind of sad. But anyway, so there was high tension, and the performance dropped. Without the leader there, the kids stopped working. And so they were not happy either. So low morale. What surprised Lewin, and surprises a lot of people, is the same thing happened if the leader was too passive. So when there was tension again. There was tension, high tension, because the kids would be like, well, what are we supposed to do? And then they have to try to figure it out for themselves. And so they're already bickering with each other. I go into organization after organization. I work with groups mostly. I don't teach. I teach, I've always taught, but I spend a lot of my time working with groups. And in the groups, the same thing. They'll say, well, there's too many priorities. We don't know what we're supposed to be doing. We need more guidance. What I have found since 1984 in most groups is that there are more leaders who are too passive than there are who are too controlling. And sometimes it's a mix of both, too controlling about one thing, too passive about other things. That happens a lot too. So I used to be an engineer. Now I'm in charge of a whole plant. Well, I'm really controlling of the engineering people, but I don't really do much to guide the rest of the organization. Or I was in maintenance. So wherever I had experience, I might be too in charge or too involved. And then with the rest of the organization, I might not be involved enough. But most people fear that they'll have an authoritarian boss. And yet, so a lot of people, when they become bosses, when they become supervisors, they don't want to be that, so they're too nice. They're too worried about upsetting people. They're just hoping that people will just do their jobs. Why can't they just do their jobs? They're adults. And then maybe they go home and think, well, how come my spouse just doesn't understand me? Why do I have to talk to them? And so people carry this at home and at work, the unspoken expectations that people will just get the message and do the program. And so it doesn't work. Doesn't work. If you're too passive, it doesn't work. When the leader got up, left the room, the kids stopped working. They started bickering. Same thing as with the authoritarian group. Productivity was worse in the passive group in the first place of the three styles. But when the leader walked out the door, it was done. So same with the authoritarian group. The democratic style of leadership combines the best of these two, and it's the hardest to do. You have to provide structure. You have to give priorities. You have to let people know what's important. You have to stay in touch with people. And you have to give them as much freedom as possible to do their work and to influence their work. You are combining freedom and structure. That is the way to lead. If you do that, as with these kids, When the leader left the room, the kids kept working in the democratic style groups. Same kids who had stopped working with a totalitarian leader or with an authoritarian leader. The kids kept working. So no leader, doesn't matter, because they are engaged in their tasks. They got to help figure out what their mask was going to look like, what materials they were going to use, who they were going to work with. They were all in pairs. And so when the leader left the room, they just kept working. They didn't even notice. They were enjoying themselves, so why would they stop? The tension was low, so there wasn't a bunch of infighting. This is the style of leadership everyone needs. Something close to the balance of structure and freedom. And it's going to be different for every group. So it's not just going to be one way, but that's the key. So that's why democracy works. People are responsible for themselves, and there's a structure, so there's a government. So, the roads get fixed. And if you have to, there's, you can stop an enemy from invading you. But on the other hand, are citizens that own responsibility for the overall good of the country. And that's how it's got to work. So field theory. So there's a field for you. Democracy is one kind of field. Authoritarianism is another kind of field. And so every situation that you are facing, Lewin would call a quasi-stationary homeostasis. Somebody should make a song out of that. So in other words, there's forces holding the system in place. Every system is the way it is because of these forces, restraining and driving forces that are holding it in its current way of being. If you do things outside the norm of your system, people will get stressed. And the stress will be an invitation that they're not even aware they're sending for you to get back in line. That's why change is hard. What Lewin got clear about is that if you decrease the restraining forces up here, then you will have a good chance of making the system move in the right direction, and then you can freeze it back in place or into the new place, really. And so that's the key. Most people just come in with a solution. Okay, we're going to put in this program, and if you're in an organization where the last solutions didn't work, you already have a restraining force. Nobody believes it's going to work. If you have an organization where everybody's overworked, you've got a restraining force. If you have an organization where there's no trust in the leadership, you have a restraining force. How are they going to implement something when they don't even trust you? You're doomed. And so most implementations do not get nearly the results they could have. And then people think it was the thing. Oh, well, that wasn't the right solution. Let's try this next one. Let's get the next one from the solution counter over here. And they miss it that what you got to do is have a frank, open conversation about what's in the way here, really. What's in the way? And in that conversation, it's a democratic conversation because you're allowing people to speak and be heard. You're influencing each other, and you're already starting to build a new culture by having the conversation. So, Lewin's also was, like I said, very aware of his upbringing as a minority, as an oppressed person. And so he learned from that about systems. And if you're in a system where there's oppression, where there's any kind of group like classism, racism, sexism, it's hard to find a place in the world that doesn't have sexism. So there's in a system that has any ism like that, let's take sexism, then the people in power are going to be sensitive about and defensive. Oh, it's not because I'm sexist, et cetera, et cetera. And the people who don't have power are going to be wondering always, am I being treated this way because of my gender? Am I being treated, is this sexism happening now in this moment? This person is not listening to me in this meeting, this man. Is it, is this sexism? I haven't advanced in 10 years. Is it because really I need to do something different, or is it just the system I'm in? And it's hard to tell the difference. And so then people on both ends of it start to get really sensitive about it. And so, and people have anxiety, especially if they're in the oppressed group. And they have other emotional issues about it if they're in the oppressed group. Anger, of course. Who wouldn't be angry if you're oppressed? So, and then it's like held against them. It doesn't help to, therapy is good. Don't get me wrong. It's wise to go see a therapist at some point in your life. If you haven't done it yet, go do it. Learn about your own habits. How'd you get the habits you've got? And so on, about relationships. And it's very wise. And therapy isn't going to change oppression. It may help you cope with it more, but you aren't going to cure it by having everybody go get therapy. You got to change the system. You have to change the field. And so as Mel Brooks here demonstrates with his high anxiety, that's going to be a characteristic of anybody that's on the margin between the group they're part of, which they're both attached to but wish they weren't part of it because it's oppressed, and the group that's in charge, which they resent but kind of wish they were part of because, well, they've got money and cars and things like that. And so it's a marginal position to be in. It's not a good position to be in. It drives people slightly crazy. We're all slightly crazy, in my humble opinion. So, in other words, behavior is a function of the personality, however you've learned to cope with the environment and the environment you're in. And that's why always the restraining forces are part of looking at, well, what's the overall picture of this environment? How can we look at that together and change the environment? Are people demoralized in our organization? Guess what? It's not just because of their personalities. It's got something to do with the organization. And if you find the right way to change the field of emotionality in your organization, which you can do, then they won't be demoralized anymore. Your morale will go up. So get cracking. There's no reason not to do it. You need the CEO probably to help with that. He's probably not watching this video, but it'd be good if he would, or she. See, I have that assumption from a sexist society. So now here's two girls that were in the same studies with Lewin, and when they switched groups, they immediately adapted the behavior of the new leaders in the groups they went into. It's predictable. Group decision making. So Lewin, by the way, he died in 1947. He was 57 years old, born in 1890. And in the time he was with us, he did many, many studies where he documented the results, and always came out like this. Just over and over again, in industry, outside of industry, just with diverse groups, farmers in the Midwest. Basically, if an expert taught a traditional training style class and lectured to individuals, then they basically, here's lecture here, see? That's the bar there for implementation after lecture. The US government here wanted people to change their eating habits, and it had very little effect. Classroom with a very skilled teacher. Same teacher, if they allowed the people in the classroom to talk to each other, to think for themselves, to come up with their own version of a solution, and then they agreed on what they were going to do, boom, they went out and implemented like crazy and sustained it. That is the key. You have to let the people facing the problem, you have to let your production workers, you have to let your frontline people think and talk to each other and come up with their own approaches. If you're not willing to do that, then you will have low morale and low productivity. You'll save some time getting to low morale and low productivity. So, group decision making. Here is in industry, the group at the top here was allowed to look at their own industrial work and come up with their own solutions on how to make the work go smoother. So as you can see, zoop, as soon as they did that, boop, increase and sustain. And this is the rest of the plant. These groups just tried to have the boss figure it out, or an expert. And these groups here is that's the total. So here's another thing that Lewin noticed that is, I think, wonderful. And you may not think it's wonderful because it's sort of challenging to people to think this way, but the social construction of reality, we make all this stuff up. We make the rules up about how to be, and we then learn them from generation to generation. So we don't even realize that humans came up with it, but of course they did. So we get born into it. And when we're born, that's the circle here that is called essence. When you came into the world, you were perfect in your emotional congruence. If you were a guy, you were freely willing to let people know if you were afraid or sad, and you cried like the baby that you were. You cried like a baby. It was very healthy for you. And if you were a girl and you were angry because you weren't getting food or whatever, you let people know, I'm angry. So there it was. And if you were happy, of course, there was no hiding it. There was no, well, I don't want to pretend like I'm happy. I don't want to look too happy because maybe they'll take advantage of me. And so all that kind of crap that we add in. We add that in, every one of us. We get it because of another really wonderful thing. When we come into the world, we have a completely open mind. So we just start taking it in. Wow, oh, wow, they're speaking. Oh, they're making noises. Oh, that noise means food or love or stop crying or whatever it means. And so pretty soon we know language, and we know all kinds of stuff that that the adults don't know they're teaching. Things like, don't cry. And eventually it starts to become more obvious. Like if you're a boy, don't cry. And whatever you do, don't look afraid. They'll beat you up if you do. So it's in your best interest to look tough all the time to the 2-year-old, and so on. So anyway, well, we learn from our environment, and we learn all kinds of other stuff from our environment, like about trust. And so like if we were first born, we probably had to take care of ourselves and run the show with kids. And so we probably really trust ourselves, but not so much trust others because no one took care of us anyway. Mom and dad didn't have time, or whoever was raising us. So we were the little parent. So then we can go through life like that if we don't reopen our mind and think about our habits and how is it really working now? Okay, I'm 61. And so I don't have to live the same script I've lived all my life just because I learned it as a kid when I didn't even know I was learning. So people can change. They can change prejudice. This is what Lewin proved. Even if I'm a racist today, I don't have to be a racist tomorrow if I have help rethinking my habits. So that's what's so great about this stuff. Here we go. The social construction of reality. So now Lewin came up with ways to rethink it. And I've done this in workplaces all my life, help people rethink their prejudice about management. You can't trust management. And their prejudice about workers. You can't trust workers. And so on. I mean, it's all in there, and people have to get some structure and help thinking about it, but they can't be forced. It doesn't help to say, never think anything racist. It's bad. And then shame people in a class. They're just going to walk out more upset than ever, except now they'll be mad at you and the people they were already mad at, whatever their ism is. So they got to get there on their own. People have to be able to talk, and they have to be able to talk with peers, and that's what they get influenced by, is peers. And you can do it intentionally. You can help people learn to think differently. You can throw people together like maintenance and production, and they will learn to realize that the other people aren't all that bad after all, and actually they're part of the problem. I'm always part of the problem if there's problems, and they can learn that. And so now, what can I do different? Like maybe I could give information differently, or maybe I could stop talking about this other group behind their back and actually start talking to them. So re-education cannot be merely a rational process. It's an emotional process. And if all you do is, again, try to lecture people, well, we've already seen that doesn't work. Lecturing people just doesn't work. And so adults don't like to be lectured at. It's much more likely through mutual exploration with peers, positive peer pressure. Lewin applied that to racial tension in Connecticut. He applied that to people in New York saying, well, we can't hire black people as clerks in our at Macy's or whatever because the white people will stop shopping here. So he used it over and over to address racism in some really creative ways. And his methods just, they worked. People, for one, you have to bring people together. You can't keep them separate. This Connecticut workshop on racism, on racial tension, he brought the people together that were tense with each other. And he brought in all kinds of members of the community, including the power structure. You can't leave out the power structure and expect change to stick. You have to have them in the room at some point, engaging. So, but it works. All those things can be changed. Sexism can be changed. So, and one thing he did was he realized by accident that if you just have people talk about not the topic, everyone knows how to talk about a topic like the weather or the sports team or the pandemic. Okay, everyone knows how to do that. What people aren't so good at and need help with is how to talk about, like, do I think I'm being listened to in this moment by the other people in the room? Am I listening to them? I feel stressed about what the last person said. Now what do I do? Can I figure out whether I misunderstood them by talking to them somehow? What's happening between us, within us? What's the group process? And that determines the quality of the conversation about the topic. If you're not paying attention to this, this will be a waste of time. So, and part of that process is that there's observers. You have to be able to observe objectively what's happening between you and others. Lewin taught people how to do that. You can get better at doing it. You have to separate out what's my judgment about others and my interpretation, and what are they actually doing and saying, because they're two different things. I guarantee you, much of the time they're two different things. And people think that their opinion about others is the truth. And that is one of the social constructions of reality that I beg you to reconsider. Your opinion about others is more about your own story about humans and life and yourself than it is some kind of fact about the others. So, change is 3 steps. You may have heard of this. There's the unfreeze portion. You've got to break the homeostasis. One way to do that right away is to get people that aren't normally asked to talk about what's wrong in this place to sit down and have a conversation about what's wrong in this place, what's in the way, what's holding us back. Instead of just having the leadership or some fancy consultant like me or anybody do the thinking for them. Unfreeze the homeostasis of having your own people do their own thinking. They know how to think about what's happening. They just need some structure to help organize it and not just make it blaming, okay? And then you move. You're already moving at that point. You got to move the forces into a new position, and then you want to lock it in. Okay, we have shifted from the management doing all the thinking to everybody sharing the thinking, and management doing all the implementing to everybody doing the implementing. And so we're going to stick with that. We've got to stick with that. Stick with that. Get there and stick with it. If you just do that, that's all you got to do. That'll help a lot. Now, we've applied this all over the world. I've been really fortunate. This has been a lot of fun so far. So I hope to keep doing it for another 30 years. Let's say 30 years. It's been 35 since I started. So plan change. It works everywhere. Every culture is happy to do their own thinking. And they can do their own thinking about how they relate to the people above them. It's not going to be the same in one place as in another. Some places people are just going to want to spit it out. Other places people are going to want to kind of massage it some, but that's okay. It's not a one size fit all thing, how to be. However, if you are not engaging all the people in thinking and helping solve, then it's a mistake. So that's one size fit all. These democratic principles really work. You can have your authoritarian system if you must, and you can be too passive if you just can't break the habit, but you're not going to get the results of sustained engagement. So, but anyway, this works everywhere. This is my brother and I during a break. That's me in Egypt. We were doing the same kind of work with the Egyptian management team. This was my first project ever back in 1984. My father was helping a citizens project in Spokane, Washington, where we lived. There was a lot of conflict about what was to be the future of a huge downtown Central Park. And people were, angry at the city council and the park department. And then when they hired Dad to help, they were angry at Dad. And he still, listened and then helped them get to work, engaging in, well, what do they think it should be? And how do we get the rest of the citizens involved? We had a big vote. Thousands of people in the city ended up voting on various options. And then they moved forward. They broke the deadlock. Lewin's methods of plan change were applied to post-World War II Germany and Japan. He influenced the State Department. The State Department managed to not go in like dictators and say you have to be just exactly the same as the United States. And Lewin said to them, quite frankly, yes, democracy. We can teach, you can transfer democracy. If you go in and say, well, the United States we're experts on democracy, while you have segregation in the South, you have so much racism, you've wiped out the Native Americans. No one's going to listen to you if you say you're experts on democracy. You have to go in and say, look, we believe in democracy, and now how would you set up your own? And you have to engage the people in these countries. And they did, and they came up with different models, and both of those nations have made amazing transformations from how they were before World War II to how they are today. It's quite remarkable. And that's big culture change, wouldn't you say? That's pretty big culture change, probably bigger than the company you're in. So it's possible to do this large scale and small scale. That's what I love about this stuff. The laws of social science. So here we are, we're back to it now. Get your own people. Do the local assessment. Well, what's in the way here? Let's just have a frank conversation. What's in the way? Well, and then what would you do about what's in the way? And who's willing to actually lead the charge? When I do this, there's hourly workers who are going to go do stuff. Just one that pops right to mind is an hourly worker who said, well, we have all these parts out in the rain. It drives me crazy. Why don't we build a shed? And so, whereas the management solutions that came out of the same conversation took, weeks, months, 3 days later, the worker and his friends had built a shed in their own spare time, and with some time, during the workday and so on, allowed to it, they built a shed. Now the parts weren't in the rain. And so, anyway, and it means a lot to people to be able to address things that have been driving them crazy, that no one seems to care about. Management doesn't seem to listen. That's a restraining force. So get the local people working on it, the people who actually have their hands on it. If you want to change poverty, get the people who are poor to help change poverty. Don't just stick them in a new tenement or something. And so you can change a whole country. And you have to come up with your own strategy. And you don't know what it is until you engage the people. If you already know what it is, you're not allowing them to influence. That's it. Have your own people assess restraining forces, come up with their own solutions. You can do this. And you can call me and I'll talk to you free. I'm happy to guide people in this process. I mean, I like getting paid. I'll come work. That's cool too, or at least I'll work virtually for right now. I'm taking it very careful in this thing, but that's it. That's the key. So here's my contact information, and here I am. This is one of my most recent T-group learning processes in Jamaica. I've been working there since 1999 and leading groups like this. This one happens to have my wife here, Alicia, in it, who's also from the parish of St. Elizabeth. So I'm quite blessed. And I really hope that I feel free to travel again sometime soon, because I miss Jamaica. I'm stuck in my home, which is nice. And Plan Change. This is a good book. So it's available now for pre-order any day now. The print version and the Kindle version will be available by the time you see this. It should be available. So it's on Amazon. But it's also in, if you're watching this during the conference, the Carib HR Forum Conference, then it's also in the swag bag. One of you lucky participants will get a copy of this book. I'm going to give you either the print version or the electronic version, whichever you prefer. And if it's really hard to get it to you because you live like somewhere very remote, then I could just send you the PDF. And again, now this is, sorry to bore the rest of you, this is about the conference. Next steps, there will be a free conversation group that I'll be leading. There will be virtual coaching. I mean, this is always true. It's discounted though for attendees. I'm a first session free. Happy to get on the phone with you, do a Zoom call, whatever it takes, and talk about your situation. And by the end of that, you'll probably be able to go do whatever you need to do. So you probably won't even need me after that. And so webinar series, now I'm always running webinars. And so I just want you to know about that. And I do a sliding fee scale, at least for now, it's a sliding fee scale, $0 to $50. And I really don't mind people signing up for $0. There's all kinds of circumstances out there. So I'm glad to have people on the webinar. And then finally, customized trainings. I am fully virtual now. I look forward to being in person again. I love interacting with people in the situation, but these virtual workshops work amazingly well. So please, if you have needs, I'd be happy to fulfill them. And that is the end of this presentation. It has been a pleasure. There is a live question and answer session coming up sometime soon in this conference, and I hope to chat with some of you there. Take care. God bless.